We imagine an addict as someone in a dark alley, trembling, desperate, ruined by a bottle or a needle. But what if the addict is also the man who can't stop checking his phone every 2 minutes? The woman who scrolls through empty validation at 2 a.m., hoping to feel something, anything? What if addiction is no longer the exception, but the default? In a world louder than our own thoughts, we are trained to escape. From pain, from silence, from ourselves. But what are we really escaping from? Carl Jung once said, "All neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering." And addiction? It's the most desperate substitution of all. Not just for suffering, but for meaning, for purpose, for the soul's hunger. Addiction is not about substances. It's about the unbearable heaviness of living without direction. It's a scream, muffled by habits, a collapse hidden behind screens. A ritual performed to avoid seeing the truth in the mirror. Most people think addicts are broken, but Jung believed they are searching, not for highs, but for wholeness. The drink, the drug, the obsession, they are symbols. Symbols of a lost connection between the self and the soul. That's why most treatments fail. They address behavior, but not the why behind it. They treat symptoms, but ignore the psychic wound. Because addiction, in its rawest form, is a cry for transformation. The addict doesn't need more discipline, he needs rebirth. He needs to confront the silent storm inside, the unresolved trauma, the buried shadow, the disowned truth. And here's the part no one dares to say. You might be an addict too, addicted to noise, addicted to control, addicted to being seen. You may not inject poison into your veins, but you inject distractions into your mind hour after hour. We've built a civilization on escapism, and we call it success. Jung didn't see addicts as outcasts. He saw them as the ones who could no longer lie to themselves. People who in their brokenness had touched something true, something most of us spend our lives avoiding. Addiction is not weakness. It's a powerful signal, a spiritual rebellion against a life that feels dead inside. It's the soul pulling, the emergency brake. And until we understand what the addict is truly seeking, we will never understand ourselves, because the addict is not separate from us. He is us, stripped of illusions, stripped of masks, raw, exposed, and desperately trying to return home. This is not a story about drugs. This is not a story about broken people. This is a story about all of us, and the psychological war we are losing, quietly, every day. Carl Jung never saw addiction as a moral failure. He saw it as a spiritual emergency, a breakdown of meaning in the human psyche, a collapse of connection between who we are and who we pretend to be. The addict is not weak. The addict is wounded, not by circumstance alone, but by a world that taught him to silence his pain. A world that never gave him the tools to make sense of his suffering. Jung believed every human being carries a shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or deny. The darker impulses, the shameful desires, the hidden fears. And for most of us, this shadow remains buried, unseen. But in the addict, it explodes. Because addiction is not just about seeking pleasure. It's about numbing the unbearable. It's about running from a truth too painful to face, a truth that often goes all the way back to childhood, neglect, trauma, a feeling of being invisible, unlovable, unwanted. The addict finds in the substance or the behavior a temporary doorway out of that pain. A moment where nothing hurts. A moment where they are finally in control. Where the chaos inside becomes quiet, even if just for a second. But the escape always comes at a cost. The brain adapts. The soul detaches. The original wound, the thing they were trying to escape, remains untreated. And over time, the thing that once gave relief becomes the prison itself. Jung understood that you cannot fix a spiritual crisis with physical solutions alone. You can't punish, medicate, or shame someone out of addiction. You have to guide them inward, to the root of the psychic wound. And that root is almost always the same: disconnection, from meaning, from love, from self. The addict is someone who has lost faith in the outer world and has not yet found peace in the inner one. That's why Jung warned, if you remove the addiction without addressing the void it was filling, you only increase the suffering. The pain will look for another outlet. It will mutate. One addiction will simply be replaced with another. Alcohol becomes sex. Sex becomes work. Work becomes approval. The pattern continues until the wound is faced directly. Jung wrote of a patient, an alcoholic who had tried everything. Treatments, institutions, programs, nothing worked. Until one day Jung said something that changed everything. You are not truly powerless over alcohol. You are powerless over the absence of God in your life. He didn't mean religion, he meant wholeness, a sense of connection to something beyond the ego, something sacred. This one insight later became the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous, that true recovery begins not with force, but with surrender. Surrender to a higher order, to meaning, to the unconscious depths of the self. The addict isn't trying to destroy themselves. They're trying to find themselves in the only way they know how, through rituals of escape, through extremes, because in their suffering they intuit something the rest of the world denies, that to be fully alive hurts to live honestly, to confront trauma, to question the system, to walk away from numbness. These things require more courage than society rewards. So the addict does what many of us secretly do, just louder, faster, and with fewer masks. Jung saw this not as a flaw but as a kind of initiation, a brutal awakening, a chance to become whole, if the pain is faced, not avoided. And this is the paradox. The addict is not far from salvation. In fact, they're closer to transformation than most, because they've already been to hell, they've already seen the emptiness behind the mask. The next step is not more control, it's more honesty, the courage to sit with the wound and listen. The shadow doesn't disappear by being ignored. It disappears when it is integrated. When the addict stops asking, how do I stop the behavior? And starts asking, what is this behavior trying to tell me? Because deep beneath every addiction is a truth, a pain, a history, a longing. And until we are brave enough to go there, we will never be free. Addiction is no longer the exception. It has become the operating system of modern life. We scroll, swipe, snack, shop, and binge not for joy, but for distraction, not to feel more, but to feel less. We don't call it addiction anymore. We call fight culture, entertainment, hustle, productivity. But beneath the shiny surface, something deeper is happening, a collective flight from stillness, from silence, from the self. Carl Jung would have called it a psychic epidemic. The human mind, Jung believed, was never meant to endure this much stimulation without reflection, this much input without integration, this much noise without meaning. And yet that's exactly what we do every day. We wake up and check our phones before checking in with ourselves. We fill every pause with something. Music, headlines, messages, memes, anything to avoid sitting in the quiet discomfort of our own thoughts. But here's the truth we refuse to face. Every addiction begins with an unwillingness to be present. To be fully present is to feel everything. Grief, joy, boredom, confusion, emptiness. But our world sells a different promise. Constant comfort, constant stimulation, constant escape. The addict isn't separate from society. The addict is its most honest mirror. We've built an economy that feeds on our restlessness. Algorithms that exploit our loneliness. Products that target our insecurities. And systems that profit when we stay distracted. Our attention is currency. Our pain is monetized. And so, we become addicted, not just to substances or behaviors, but to patterns, to identities, to ways of thinking that keep us running in circles, never arriving. Jung warned of this. He believed that when a person loses meaning, they don't become neutral. They become vulnerable to manipulation, to fantasy, to compulsions. The void doesn't stay empty. It fills itself with whatever promises quick relief. That's why modern addiction isn't just about chemicals, it's about chronic avoidance. It's not heroin in the veins, it's endless scrolling at 3 a.m. It's the fifth glass of wine after a day of smiling through soul-crushing work. It's staying busy to avoid asking why we feel so hollow inside. This is the age of chronic escape. And the tragedy is, it works. Temporarily. But the cost? Depth, purpose, connection. Our very sense of self. And when the numbing stops working, and it always does, we panic. We reach for more. We blame ourselves. We think we're broken. But the truth is, we were never meant to live like this. The nervous system collapses under constant stimulation. The soul dries up under constant distraction. And meaning becomes impossible when every moment is filled with noise. Jung believed the only way out was inward, to stop running. To stop sedating, to face what we've buried, the fear, the shame, the sadness, the truth, not to be punished by it, but to be guided through it. Because addiction, at its core, is not a disease. It is a map, a distorted path pointing toward something sacred, the truth that we are living wrong, that something vital is missing, and that silence, real, raw, terrifying silence, is the only way back. Modern life has made us addicts. But we still have a choice. We can keep escaping, or we can stop, we can numb, or we can feel, and in the terrifying stillness that follows, we might just remember who we really are. Carl Jung believed that when man loses his connection to the divine, he doesn't become rational, he becomes desperate, and in that desperation he turns to false gods, not statues or deities in robes, but illusions of power, status, fame, validation, control. These are the modern idols, and addiction is the silent worship. The addict doesn't just chase pleasure, he chases meaning, he chases control over a chaotic, indifferent world. But when the soul has no compass, it latches onto whatever glows in the dark. We think of addiction as weakness, but often it begins in a moment of inner rebellion, a refusal to accept powerlessness, a hunger to master one's fate, even if that mastery is a lie. Jung saw this clearly. When a person loses their center, they become split. One side becomes the obedient mask, the normal self. The other becomes the exiled part, the wild, angry, hungry force that refuses to be silenced. Addiction emerges when that exiled part is not integrated but hidden. When society punishes the symptoms but ignores the cause, we live in a culture of idols, celebrity, wealth, perfection. And beneath every screen, every ad, every promise is one seductive lie. This will finally make you whole. The addict believes that lie because for a brief moment it feels true. The drug, the high, the win, the attention, it feels like power, like victory, like wholeness. But it's never real. It's counterfeit transcendence. The relief fades, the void remains, and so the addict tries again and again, not because they are delusional, but because the system trains them to. Consumer culture teaches us to manage our spiritual hunger with material solutions. If you feel empty, buy something. If you're lost, get more followers. If you're tired, keep working. It's not just addicts who do this, it's all of us. The modern world rewards the addictive personality. It praises the overachiever, the workaholic, the influencer, the endlessly productive. We don't call them addicts, we call them successful. But underneath the image is the same wound, the fear of not being enough without the thing. And this is the dark genius of the false god. It doesn't just feed your compulsion, it gives it a name, it makes it sacred, it turns it into identity. I'm a grinder. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a party animal. I'm the strong one, the funny one, the one who never breaks. These are not truths. They are survival masks, personas built to protect a very fragile inner self. And the more we depend on them, the more we lose sight of who we really are. Jung warned that the ego will cling to these masks until the breaking point. It would rather stay addicted than risk annihilation, because beneath every addiction is a terrifying question. What if I'm nothing without this? What if there's nothing underneath the performance, the habit, the obsession? But Jung had an answer. He believed that real transformation only begins when the false god is destroyed. When the illusion shatters, when the addict is finally forced to confront the sacred void without reaching for the usual escape. This moment, this collapse, is not the end. It is the beginning. Because in that darkness, there is an opening, a chance to reconnect with the self, not the ego, not the mask, but the deep, eternal presence inside, the part that cannot be bought or numbed or performed. This is what Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole, not perfect, not cured, whole. It's the moment when the addict realizes, I don't need to be powerful, I need to be honest. It's when the pursuit of control is replaced by the pursuit of integration, when we stop chasing highs and start chasing truth. And here's the paradox. The moment we give up trying to be gods, we become human again. And in that return to humility, we find something stronger than any addiction ever offered. We find peace, but peace doesn't come through force. It comes through surrender, not to the substance, not to the system, but to the truth of what we are. Imperfect, wounded, searching. And that's not weakness, that's where healing begins. Just stop. Be stronger. Have some self-control. These are the words often thrown at addicts, by society, by family, by themselves, as if addiction is a moral failure, as if discipline alone could silence the hunger of the soul. But Carl Jung saw the truth. He knew that the battle between willpower and addiction is not fought on the surface, it's fought in the shadow. Willpower is a conscious force, a decision, a command from the ego. But addiction doesn't live in the conscious mind, it lives in the unconscious, in the forgotten, rejected, and repressed parts of the psyche. Jung called this the shadow, everything you don't want to see in yourself. Your rage, your shame, your guilt, your loneliness, your need to be held. The addict isn't weak because they lack willpower. The addict is overwhelmed because they are at war with a part of themselves they don't even understand. They drink not to feel pleasure, but to silence the inner voice that says they are unworthy. They smoke to drown the panic of meaninglessness. They scroll endlessly, not because they're lazy, but because the stillness terrifies them. And here's the problem with willpower. It fights symptoms, not roots. It resists the urge, but never questions why the urge exists. It suppresses the craving, but never listens to the cry underneath it. The more you push the shadow away, the more power it gains. The more you try to dominate it, the more it rebels. The more you pretend it's not there, the more it controls your life from the dark. This is why relapse happens, not because of weakness, but because of ignorance. The addict thinks they're fighting a habit, but they're actually fighting a wounded self that wants to be seen. You cannot conquer the shadow with willpower. You must integrate it. And integration doesn't mean indulgence, it means curiosity. It means asking, what am I really avoiding? What wound am I trying to numb? What emotion feels too dangerous to face? When you ask those questions, not with judgment but with compassion, the shadow begins to speak. And often it doesn't scream, it whispers, I'm afraid. I'm exhausted. I don't know how to be loved. These are not signs of moral failure. They are signs of a soul that has been alone too long. Jung believed healing begins when the ego stops pretending to be in control and starts listening, not to the noise outside, but to the chaos within. Because the goal isn't to crush the sore addiction with force. The goal is to understand what it's trying to say. Willpower can delay the relapse, but only shadow work can end the war. To face the shadow is to reclaim your power, not by fighting your darkness, but by owning it. Not to become perfect, but to become whole. There comes a point in every addict's journey where the pain becomes too loud to ignore. The high no longer works, the escapes no longer soothe, and the mirror no longer lies. This is not failure. This is the threshold. Carl Jung understood this moment as more than crisis. It was initiation, a symbolic death, the collapse of the false self, necessary for something deeper to emerge. In every ancient culture, the rite of passage was marked by suffering. The boy becomes a man not through comfort, but through ordeal, through pain, through separation from the familiar and confrontation with the unknown. Addiction, in its darkest hour, replicates this ancient ritual. But it does so in a modern world that offers no guide, no elder, no meaning. The addict suffers, but without a map. Jung believed that suffering, when faced consciously, could become the path to transformation, not because pain is noble, but because pain exposes truth. It strips away the illusions, the excuses, the personas. It leaves you raw, empty, and, paradoxically, ready. Ready to meet the self, not the curated image, not the addicted persona, but the real being underneath all of it. The one who has endured, the one who still hopes, but this initiation only works if the suffering is not denied, not numbed, not rushed. You must sit in it, feel it, let it break you open, not to destroy you, but to reveal you. This is what Jung meant when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," because consciousness doesn't come from more information. It comes from facing the parts of yourself that terrify you, the guilt you buried, the grief you never expressed, the self-loathing you coated in performance and charm. These are the fires of initiation. And most people run from them, but those who stay, who endure, are transformed, because on the other side of that pain is a strange and quiet thing: clarity. Clarity about what truly matters. Clarity about who you are without the addiction. Clarity about how little control you ever had, and how liberating that realization can be. The suffering doesn't end suddenly, but it shifts. It becomes sacred. It becomes a teacher. And slowly a new foundation begins to form, not built on fear, not built on denial, but on truth. And from that truth, a new life can be built, not one free of darkness, but one no longer enslaved by it. When most people hear the word addict, they imagine a heroin user in an alleyway, or a man passed out drunk in a dark room. But Jung would ask us to look closer, much closer, because addiction isn't just about substances. It's about patterns of escape. And in that sense, modern society is addicted by design. We scroll endlessly on glowing rectangles. We binge TV shows not to be entertained, but to avoid our own thoughts. We work 80-hour weeks not for purpose, but because we don't know who. We are without productivity. We are addicted to noise, to distraction, to control, to validation from people we don't even know. But Jung warned us, any compulsive behavior, no matter how socially acceptable, is a symptom of a deeper psychological wound. When the soul is sick, it doesn't just cry, it escapes. And today, we are surrounded by escape hatches, built into our phones, baked into our culture, sold to us as freedom, but functioning as chains. The question is no longer, are you addicted? The question is, what are you using to escape yourself? It could be sugar or shopping or always needing to be liked, or the need to win every argument, or the inability to sit in silence for even 10 minutes. Addiction wears many disguises, and the most dangerous ones are those society rewards. But Jung saw this coming. Long before the rise of smartphones or streaming platforms, he wrote about the collective neurosis, a cultural madness where entire societies become disconnected from the soul. He warned that modern man had become hollow, hyper-intellectual, spiritually starved. We replaced myth with media, ritual with routine, depth with dopamine, and so we chase more experiences, more followers, more entertainment, hoping that the next hit will finally make us feel whole, but it never does. Because it can't. No external stimulation can heal an internal emptiness. That's the great lie of the modern world, and we're all paying for it. Jung believed the only cure was inner work, to step back from the noise, descend into the unconscious, and confront the self. Not the ego, not the brand, not the role, but the ancient, unchanging part of you that remembers what matters. The problem is that our culture doesn't want us to do this. It wants us obedient, addicted, distracted. A self-aware society is hard to manipulate, but a society numbed by pleasure and terrified of silence, that's easy to control. And so we live in a world where healing is revolutionary, where meditation is an act of rebellion, where saying no to dopamine and yes to discomfort is a spiritual war. Jung would say that the addict is not the exception. The addict is the mirror. They reflect the parts of society we're too proud to admit. The difference is, they've fallen far enough to feel it. The rest of us are still floating, comfortably lost, drowning in blue light and convenience. But eventually, the bill comes. Due, the soul demands to be heard, and whether through breakdown or breakthrough, it always finds a way. So the question isn't whether you're addicted. The question is, what pain are you avoiding? And what would happen if you finally faced it? There is a moment, after the collapse, after the rage, after the 1,000 small deaths, when the addict sees something they've never seen before. Not perfection, not a cure, but a glimpse of the self. Not the ego trying to fix or control, but the deeper self that observes, forgives, and integrates. This is what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you what to be. Before the wounds, the masks, the patterns of escape, the addict's journey is brutal, but it is also sacred. Because unlike most people, they are forced to confront what others spend their lives avoiding, the illusion of control, the emptiness of identity, the truth of their suffering, and in that confrontation, something ancient awakens. The path of individuation is not linear. There are relapses, regressions, nights of hopelessness, but every step inward is a step closer to truth, to balance, to freedom, not from pain but from self-deception. Healing doesn't mean the cravings vanish, it means you no longer worship them. You see them for what they are, messengers, not masters. The true addict isn't the one who uses, it's the one who refuses to look within. But those who do, those who endure the descent into their own darkness and come out with a sliver of light, they carry a wisdom this world desperately needs, a depth. To our humility, a hard-earned truth, they become guides, not because they're perfect, but because they've died and come back, and they know, deep in their bones, that the way out isn't up, it's down, into the shadow, into the soul, into the self. So if you're struggling, know this, you are not broken, you are being initiated, not into weakness but into wisdom, not into shame but into selfhood. The addiction is not your enemy, it's a doorway. The question is, will you walk through it? If this journey resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this, not for the algorithm, but because you might save someone from silence. And if you're ready to confront your shadow, to question the lies you've believed about yourself, then stay with us. This isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And on the other side of the reflection is your real life waiting to begin.